People lived in a world where smells served as a navigator, and clean water was a luxury available only to the select few.
What if the most formidable enemy of medieval man was not the sword or the arrow, but invisible dirt? We are accustomed to seeing majestic castles and shining armor in films, but the reality was quite different. The history of that time is not only a chronicle of battles, but also a daily exhausting struggle with one's own body and the environment. People lived in a world where smells served as a navigator, and clean water was a luxury available only to the select few. Behind the high walls of fortresses and in the narrow city alleys lay a truth that is rarely written about in textbooks. It was an era when sanitation was at a survival level, and hygiene habits were dictated by fear of the cold and unknown diseases.
Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple bunch of dried grass saved people from unbearable stench and why washing clothes was considered a life-threatening activity.
What if I told you that everything you believed about the romance of castles is not true? The most important room in any fortress was not the throne room or the treasury, but a place that people preferred to keep quiet about. Medieval architecture featured a special engineering solution called a garderobe, which served as a toilet.
It was simply a stone slab with a hole in it, protruding directly from the outer wall of the castle at a great height.
All waste fell from a great height directly into the moat or into a special cesspool at the base of the wall. In calm weather, the heavy smell rose up, penetrating through the hole back into the living quarters and corridors. Architects tried to place these rooms as far away from the bedrooms as possible, but this only helped to a limited extent. The walls of the castle under such projections were covered with characteristic stains that could not be washed off or hidden. In winter, the cold wind blew into this stone opening, turning a visit to the toilet into a real test of endurance. Clothes hanging nearby in this room were saturated with a specific ammonia smell, which was believed to repel moths. But if life in the castle seemed difficult, the situation in the cities was even more dramatic and chaotic.
Ordinary townspeople did not have the luxury of a stone shaft that carried waste away from their homes. They used simple buckets and pots, which were stored under beds or in the corner of the room.
The contents of these containers accumulated overnight, filling the cramped space with a heavy and thick smell. In the morning, the problem of disposal arose, which was solved in the simplest and most affordable way. The liquid was simply poured out of the window onto the narrow street, hoping that it would flow down the gutter. There were special people whose job was to manually clean city cesspools and drains. It was one of the highest paid but most despised professions in medieval society. They worked at night so that their appearance and smell would not disturb respectable citizens during the day. Instead of the paper we are used to, people used a variety of improvised materials available in their area. The rich could afford pieces of old woolen fabric or linen, which were soft but expensive. The poor and peasants made do with bundles of straw, hay, or simply bundles of moss collected in the forest. In some regions, special smooth stones or shards of clay pottery with smooth edges were used.
This process was far from comfortable and often led to microtraumas and skin irritation.
No one thought about the sterility of these items, as the concept of germs simply did not exist. The smell of unwashed bodies and waste was not perceived as a problem, but as a natural part of human existence. People got used to it from birth and stopped noticing it until it became unbearably pungent. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how modern people would cope with such a reality for even one day? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how often people actually washed? Contrary to popular myth, medieval people knew about water but treated it with great caution and distrust. A full immersion bath was a complex logistical process, accessible only to the very wealthy or the nobility. Preparing a single bath required carrying dozens of buckets of water from a well or river by hand. This water had to be heated in cauldrons over an open fire, which required a huge amount of firewood. Firewood cost money, and the labor of the servants who carried the water also had to be paid for or provided. The wooden barrel that served as a bathtub was often lined with cloth to protect the bather's skin from splinters. The water cooled quickly in the cold stone room, so the procedure had to be quick. Often, all members of the family, starting with the head of the household, washed in the same water in turn. Those who bathed last immersed themselves in already cloudy, cold, and dirty liquid.
For most of the population, a full body wash was an event that took place several times a year, usually before major holidays.
The rest of the time, people limited themselves to wiping their faces and hands with a damp cloth. In winter, contact with water was kept to an absolute minimum due to the real risk of hypothermia and illness. In poorly heated homes, wet skin could cause colds, which at that time were often fatal. Dirt was considered a lesser evil compared to pneumonia or fever from the cold. Public baths existed in large cities, but their reputation was extremely ambiguous and questionable. The church often condemned them as places of debauchery and the spread of sin, rather than cleanliness. In addition, skin diseases and parasites were easily transmitted in the communal baths. Many people sincerely believed that hot water opened the pores of the skin, making the body vulnerable to poisonous air. It was believed that a layer of dirt and grease served as a kind of protective barrier against the penetration of disease. Therefore, washing was often replaced by dry cleaning. The body was simply rubbed with a coarse linen cloth. Soap existed, but it was made from fat and ash and had a pungent and unpleasant odor. Such a product was suitable for washing clothes, but it could severely irritate sensitive skin. The use of aromatic oils and herbs in water was a way not so much to cleanse as to mask the smell.
The process of washing was not so much a hygienic procedure as a rare ritual of pleasure for the select few. For peasants, immersion in water was most often associated with working in the rain or wading across a river.
Water was a dangerous, cold, and hostile element. How much do you think the fear of disease influenced people's desire to remain dirty? In the next chapter, you will learn how clothing replaced showers for people. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of cleanliness? In the Middle Ages, it was not the person who washed frequently who was considered clean, but the person who changed their underwear often. It was the linen shirt that was the main barrier between the body and outer clothing, absorbing all sweat and grease. Linen had unique properties. It absorbed moisture well, dried quickly, and was relatively easy to wash. The whiteness of the collar and cuffs was the main indicator of a person's status and neatness in society. Rich people could change their shirts every day, demonstrating their wealth and cleanliness. Poor people often had only 1 or 2 shirts which they wore until the fabric was completely worn out. They rarely had to be washed, as frequent washing in lye quickly destroyed the fabric. A dirty shirt was simply aired in the wind or beaten with a stick to remove dust. Outerwear made of thick wool or cloth was almost never washed during its lifetime. Wool shrank when it came into contact with hot water and lye, lost its shape, and became unsuitable for wear. Therefore, caftans, raincoats, and dresses were cleaned exclusively by dry methods.
Hard brushes were used to clean outerwear, brushing off dry dirt and dust.
Grease stains were removed with chalk, clay, or stale bread, which absorbed the oil. Such clothing accumulated odors over the years, mixing the smells of smoke, food, sweat, and the street. The heavy fabrics of outerwear provided an excellent home for various insects and parasites. Fleas and lice constantly lived in the seams and folds of woolen cloaks, and it was impossible to wash them out. People carried entire ecosystems on their bodies, resigning themselves to constant itching. Washing linen was extremely hard physical labor, which was done exclusively by women. They had to carry heavy baskets to the river, stand for hours in icy water, and beat the fabric with rolling pins. A mixture of wood ash and animal fat or urine was used as a detergent. The laundry was dried directly on the grass or bushes, hoping for sunny weather and wind. In winter, this process became almost impossible, and people wore stale laundry for months. The smell of stale sweat became an integral part of human presence. Clothes were highly valued in a person's wardrobe and were often passed down from parents to children. The same dress could serve several generations, literally absorbing the history of the family. Clothes were protection not only from the cold, but also from the outside world, full of dirt. Click like if you are glad that you have a washing machine and the opportunity to wear clean clothes every day. What if I told you that every person was a walking zoo? Parasites such as lice and fleas were completely democratic and made no distinction between kings and beggars. They lived in the lush hairstyles of court ladies and in the tangled beards of peasants. The presence of lice was considered an annoying but inevitable part of human existence on Earth. Itching was a constant background noise of life that people simply tried to ignore. Scratching in public, even during solemn ceremonies, was not considered shameful. Special scratching sticks made of bone or wood with long handles were particularly popular. They could be used to reach itchy spots under layers of heavy clothing or tall wigs. Elegant ladies wore such devices as accessories decorated with precious stones. The fight against parasites was constant, but it was more about keeping them in check than getting rid of them. One of the popular pastimes among family and friends was looking for bugs in each other's hair. This activity, called grooming, strengthened social bonds and made life a little easier. Silk and satin were valued not only for their beauty, but also for their smooth and slippery surface. Lice could not cling to the slippery fabric, so wearing silk underwear brought relief. This was another reason why rich people suffered slightly less from bites than the poor. Homes were often strewn with fresh, fragrant herbs such as lavender or wormwood. It was believed that the pungent smell of these plants repelled fleas jumping on the earthen floor. However, the effect was temporary, and the insects quickly returned or adapted to the smell.
The fur used to line clothing for warmth became an ideal refuge for entire colonies of insects.
People tried to use special fur traps, pieces of skin that they wore around their necks. It was believed that fleas would jump onto this piece of fur, which could then be shaken out. The church sometimes interpreted the presence of parasites as a sign of holiness and mortification of the flesh. Some hermits deliberately did not wash or change their clothes in order to bring themselves closer to God through suffering. For the average person, it was simply a daily inconvenience from which there was no escape. The lack of understanding of the connection between insects and disease made the situation deadly dangerous. No one guessed that these tiny creatures were carriers of the plague and typhus. People fought against itching, not realizing that they were waging war against death. Even in the most luxurious palaces, it was impossible to completely get rid of these invisible tenants. Would you be able to sleep peacefully, knowing that your pillow was teeming with life? In the next chapter, we will talk about what homes smelled like at that time. In a medieval home, the air was so thick and dense that you could physically feel it with every breath. The dwelling was filled with a heavy mixture of various sharp aromas that accompanied a person from birth to death. The main and omnipresent source of the smell was the acrid smoke from the open hearth, usually located in the center of the main room. The vast majority of houses at that time did not have chimneys as we understand them today. The smoke rose to the ceiling and slowly escaped through a small special opening in the roof or through cracks in the walls. Over the years, black, greasy soot settled on the wooden walls, simple furniture, coarse clothing, and even on the skin of the inhabitants themselves. This created a permanent, indelible layer of soot that ate into the pores and fabrics. The situation became particularly difficult in winter, as windows and doors were tightly closed to keep the precious heat inside. On such days, the concentration of smoke became critical and hazardous to health. People's eyes were constantly watering and red, and chronic coughing was a common companion for all family members. The floors in simple houses were most often just compacted earth, which was covered with a layer of straw, reeds, or cane for warmth. All the waste of everyday life accumulated in this soft plant bedding, which was not changed for months. Table scraps, gnawed bones, spilled beer, and dirt brought in on shoes from the street fell there. When the top layer became too dirty and began to smell bad, it was not swept away. A new layer of fresh, fragrant grass was simply poured on top of the old dirt. The lower layers of this peculiar carpet rotted for years, creating humus right inside the living quarters. The rotting process generated additional heat, which was appreciated in winter, but it also produced a specific musty smell of decay. It was an ideal and nutritious environment for the reproduction of a huge number of bacteria, fleas, and other insects right under the feet of the residents. Only during a major cleaning, which took place once every few years, was this compacted layer completely cleaned out down to the ground. During the cold season, in order to preserve the farm, livestock was often taken from the street into the house. Animals were the main wealth of the peasant, so it was impossible to allow them to freeze or be attacked by predators. Cows, pigs, goats, and chickens lived in one large room with people, or were kept behind a very thin symbolic partition. The sharp, pungent smell of manure and wet hides mixed with the aromas of food being prepared. Added to this was the smell of unwashed human bodies, as proper washing in winter was a difficult and rare procedure. The complete lack of ventilation turned a medieval house into an airtight box, where all odors were preserved and intensified many times over. Opening a window or door in winter was considered sheer madness, as letting the heat out meant condemning the family to a cold night. People breathed stale, heavy air saturated with carbon dioxide and various vapors for days on end. This often led to headaches and the rapid spread of infections within the family. But the fear of the cold was stronger than the desire to breathe fresh air. The lighting in the home also contributed to the overall atmosphere of odors. Candle wax was an expensive luxury, so most people used cheap tallow candles made from animal fat. When burned, these candles smoked heavily, produced soot, and emitted a nauseating smell of burning fat. Only very wealthy people or the church could afford high-quality wax candles with a pleasant honey aroma. For the common man, evenings at home always smelled of smoke and melted fat. In the Middle Ages, a house was a real fortress, protecting people from severe frosts, wild animals, and enemies, but not from smells. For medieval people, the thick smell of smoke, food, and animals was synonymous with comfort, warmth, and safety. If a house smelled, it meant there was fire, food, and life in it. The clean, sterile, and fresh air we are accustomed to would have seemed empty, cold, and lifeless to them.
Bear with me.
Are you ready to learn the truth about how teeth were treated without anesthesia or drills? The oral health of medieval people was far from ideal, even though they ate significantly less sugar than we do today. Coarsely ground bread with pieces of millstones quickly wore away the enamel, opening the way for bacteria. Toothache was a constant and painful companion in life, exhausting and literally driving people mad. There was no escape from it, day or night, and it spared neither kings nor peasants. The main cause of tooth decay and pain in those days was considered to be the mythical toothworm. People believed that this invisible parasite entered the mouth and gnawed through the tooth from the inside, causing hellish torment. Doctors and healers offered the most incredible and sometimes dangerous ways to expel or kill this imaginary pest. They used acrid smoke from poisonous bleaching powder, applied red-hot iron, and recited magic spells. Patients were willing to do anything to stop the unbearable torture. When the toothache became absolutely unbearable and folk remedies ceased to help, there was only one radical solution left. The diseased tooth had to be removed, but professional dentists did not yet exist at that time. This bloody craft was practiced by barbers, who also cut beards, village blacksmiths, or wandering tooth pullers at fairs. Their tools were very primitive, similar to a carpenter's pliers, and of course, completely unsterile. There was no anesthesia, and the patient could only be offered strong alcohol or herbal decoctions to slightly dull their consciousness. Several strong assistants held the person firmly so that they would not move while the doctor loosened and pulled out the tooth with huge pliers. This procedure was incredibly painful and often took place in front of a crowd of onlookers. Often, due to a lack of skill, part of the jaw was broken or adjacent healthy teeth were damaged, along with the diseased tooth. After a successful or unsuccessful extraction, the open wound could be cauterized with a hot iron to stop heavy bleeding. This caused further shock to the patient, but was considered necessary for disinfection. The risk of blood infection after such a barbaric operation was enormous due to dirty instruments and hands. Many people died in agony not from the diseased teeth themselves, but from the severe consequences of their treatment. A routine visit to the tooth puller could easily lead to sudden death. Losing most of one's teeth by adulthood was absolutely normal and did not surprise anyone. This circumstance greatly affected the diet, as there was nothing left to chew solid food with. People had to switch to soft porridge, mashed vegetables, and bread soaked in meat broth. A toothless mouth and sunken cheeks were a common sign of old age, which by our standards came very early. At the age of 40, a person could look like a very old man precisely because of the lack of teeth. Toothpicks were a very common household item and were often carried around. They were made of fragrant wood, bird bones, or metal, depending on the owner's wealth. Rich aristocrats wore elegant gold or silver toothpicks on a chain around their necks as expensive jewelry. It was practically the only tool available for daily oral care and removing food debris. Using a toothpick at the table was considered a sign of good manners and self-care. In those harsh times, a smile could reveal a person's social status, general health, and past suffering. Beautiful, even white teeth were a rare gift of nature, not the result of a dentist's skilled work. Keeping a full set of teeth into old age was considered a real miracle and great luck. Would you trust your teeth to a blacksmith in the town square? In the next chapter, you will learn how ordinary water could cause death. In the Middle Ages, water was a source of life, but at the same time a source of mortal danger to humans. This paradox defined the daily life of any town or village at that time. Rivers and streams flowing through populated areas served people for all their needs without exception. They took water from them for drinking and cooking, and they also washed their clothes and bathed in them. The same rivers were also used to dump all the city's sewage and the contents of chamber pots without any hesitation. Tanners washed hides in running water using caustic chemicals and lime. Butchers dumped blood and unwanted offal there after slaughtering livestock, and dyers poured out colorful toxic solutions. The water in the city river was a deadly cocktail capable of killing any daredevil. The concepts of filtration or chemical purification of water did not exist in those days. People did not know about microbes and bacteria, so they assessed the quality of water solely with their senses. They looked at its transparency, smelled it, and tasted it. If the water looked clean and did not have an obvious rotten smell, it was mistakenly considered completely safe and suitable for drinking. This naive confidence often proved fatal for entire families. Clear water could be teeming with pathogens that cause cholera, typhoid, or dysentery. The disease came on suddenly, and no one connected it with that sip of cold water a person had taken a couple of days earlier. People looked for the cause in the evil eye or God's wrath, but not in the jug on the table. Wells were considered a more reliable and cleaner source, but they often harbored hidden dangers as well. Groundwater was easily contaminated by the contents of cesspools dug nearby. In a densely built-up city, there was simply no room to place a well and a toilet at a safe distance from each other. A source located too close to an outhouse or a barn could quietly poison an entire street. Residents drank such water for years until the concentration of toxins became critical. Large-scale outbreaks of stomach diseases and epidemics often began with just one such contaminated well. By the time people realized what was going on, it was too late, and the disease had claimed dozens of lives. Therefore, any raw water was treated with great suspicion. To protect themselves in some way, people preferred to drink weak alcohol instead of raw water. Beer, cider, and diluted wine were the main beverages for all ages and classes. They were even given to small children, as they were considered much healthier than plain water. The fermentation process itself and the small amount of alcohol did indeed kill a significant portion of disease-causing bacteria. In the northern regions of Europe, ale and beer were brewed everywhere and consumed in huge quantities every day. It was a thick, cloudy, and very nutritious drink that could replace a full meal in terms of calories. Monks in monasteries drank several liters of such beer a day to maintain their strength during fasting. The morning of an ordinary townsperson began with a mug of beer, and the day ended with it. In southern countries where grapes grew, wine was always diluted with water in a ratio of 1:3 or even more. This was done to disinfect the water and make it safe to drink. Drinking undiluted wine was considered the lot of drunkards and barbarians who did not know their limits. Pure water was drunk only in the most extreme cases, when there was no other choice, or by the poorest sections of the population. A glass of plain water in a person's hand was a sign of either holiness and asceticism or extreme poverty. If a guest was offered water instead of wine or beer, it could be considered a terrible insult. It meant that the host was either too stingy or so poor that he had nothing to put on the table. Water was free, which meant it had no value in the eyes of society. Boiling water for drinking was certainly practiced, but it was not widespread due to its high cost. Firewood and coal were expensive, and spending them just to boil water was considered wasteful. Fire was used to cook food or heat the house, not to sterilize drinking water. More often, water was boiled to make thick soups and broths, which made cooked food much safer. Healthy hot drinks, such as tea and coffee, which require boiling water, appeared in Europe much later. Therefore, people did not have the habit of drinking hot water just for the sake of it. They preferred hot wine with spices or warm beer on cold winter evenings. This warmed the body and soul, and also ensured that there were no live parasites in the mug. Travelers and pilgrims always carried their own flasks with them, not trusting random sources along the way. Drinking from an unfamiliar clear stream in the forest or a public well in a strange village was a huge risk. Only unbearable thirst when the flask was empty would prompt such a desperate step. No one knew if there was a decomposing animal carcass upstream. Dysentery, known in those days as bloody diarrhea, was a real scourge of any military campaign. It mowed down huge armies much more effectively and quickly than the most modern enemy weapons. Soldiers died by the thousands without even entering battle, simply by drinking water from the local river. Commanders knew that clean water was more important than gunpowder, but it was almost impossible to provide it to the army. The lack of guaranteed clean water had a serious impact on the cuisine and everyday life of that time. Food was carefully fried over an open fire, baked in ovens, or simmered for a long time in cauldrons. Vegetables and fruits were rarely washed with raw water before serving. They were simply wiped with a cloth or peeled. People intuitively understood that dampness, moisture, and rot carried disease and death. Water was perceived as an unbridled natural element that had to be tamed and refined. Turning water into beer or wine was a way to make it friendly and safe for humans. Sobriety, as we understand it in modern medicine, would have been deadly for medieval people. Those who drank intoxicating beverages rather than crystal clear stream water survived those harsh times.
Ale here.
The streets of medieval cities were a veritable obstacle course of sticky mud, manure, and household waste. Roads paved with smooth stones were extremely rare and were found only in the very centers of large and wealthy cities. For the most part, pedestrians walked on a mixture of soggy earth, clay, and everything that residents threw out of their windows every day. Getting around the city required considerable skill and physical strength. Even a light rain instantly turned such streets into an impassable, foul-smelling swamp. The wheels of heavy carts, horses' hooves, and people's feet got stuck in this slush. Often, the whole community had to pull the carts out as they sank into the mud up to their axles. To simply cross the road and not sink knee-deep into the mud, the townspeople used special devices. These were wooden shoes on high stands or platforms called patinas. They were worn directly over ordinary leather shoes, like galoshes, to rise above the general level of street filth. Walking in them was uncomfortable, requiring balance like walking on stilts, but it saved expensive shoes and clothes. Without such protection, the hem of a dress or cloak would instantly turn into a dirty rag. Domestic animals roamed the streets freely, adding their waste to the general chaos. Pigs were the main and perhaps the only sanitation workers in the medieval city. They were specially let out for a walk so that they could eat food scraps, peelings, and garbage right off the ground. Grunting herds rummaged through piles of dirt, blocking the passage and sometimes attacking distracted children. Geese, chickens, and packs of stray dogs completed this noisy picture of bustling city life. The animals not only cleaned up some of the trash, but also became a source of dirt and specific odors themselves. Stepping in fresh manure was a common occurrence that no one even paid attention to. The city resembled a huge cattle yard in which residential buildings had been built by accident. The narrow, winding streets were almost completely unventilated, and a heavy smell hung like a thick wall between the overhanging houses. To save space, the second floors of the buildings were built wider than the first, and they hung over the street, their roofs almost touching. Because of this, sunlight rarely reached the ground, and eternal twilight reigned below. The dirt on such streets never dried completely, remaining damp even in the hot summer. In the shade of these damp alleys, black mold and rot flourished. The walls of the houses absorbed moisture from below, becoming covered with fungus and moss. Wooden structures rotted faster than they could be repaired, and the smell of dampness penetrated into the dwellings. The city authorities, of course, tried to combat the total pollution. Understanding the danger of such a situation, they regularly issued decrees obliging residents to clean the section of the street in front of their houses and take out the trash. But enforcement was very weak, and the fines did not scare everyone. Residents often ignored these requirements, hoping for the best or simply being lazy. Everyone sincerely believed that cleaning public areas was the responsibility of their neighbors or the next reign. The corpses of pets, cats, rats, and sometimes even dead beggars could be found right on the street in the morning. They were not removed immediately, sometimes lying there for days, and passers-by simply stepped over them or walked around them. They became a familiar and integral part of the gloomy urban landscape. Indifference to the sight of death and decay was a natural defensive reaction of the human psyche. Market squares were the places with the greatest accumulation of dirt and stench due to the remains of unsold goods and livestock. Butchers often slaughtered livestock and cut up carcasses right there at their wooden stalls. Blood, stomach contents, and unwanted entrails flowed directly onto the ground, into the same ditches where shoppers walked. On hot days, the stench above the market was so bad that it made unaccustomed people dizzy. At night, walking through such a city without a lit torch and sturdy high shoes was dangerous to one's life. There was no street lighting, and in complete darkness, it was easy to slip on the rubbish. A fall could result not only in dirty clothes, but also in the possibility of falling into a deep pit of sewage or breaking a leg. In addition, the darkness hid robbers who lay in wait for lone travelers in dark corners. People who lived on the upper floors of buildings were considered privileged and wealthier. They got more sunlight, and the terrible street smell was a little less noticeable there. The lower floors were the cheapest, dampest, and dirtiest rooms. They were often flooded during heavy rains when the street drains overflowed and flowed right into the doors. The vertical hierarchy of medieval society was literally reflected in the height of dwellings above the level of street dirt. The richer a person was, the higher above the ground they tried to build their bedroom. The poor, on the other hand, were forced to live in constant contact with dampness and waste. The city was a complex living organism that constantly digested itself in its own waste. Living in a medieval city meant having the ability to balance on the fine line of complete unsanitary conditions every day. People got used to the smells, the dirt, and the constant presence of parasites around them. The ideal cleanliness of dry streets was an unattainable and fantastical dream for them, one that they did not even seriously consider. In a world full of dirt and disease, medicine was a bizarre and frightening mixture of superstition, religion, and cruel practices. Doctors of that time firmly believed in the theory of the balance of four fluids in the human body. It was believed that health depended on the correct ratio of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Any ailment, whether it was a cold or a broken bone, was explained by a violation of this delicate balance. Treatment was always aimed at forcibly restoring it, often contrary to common sense. The most universal and popular method of treatment was bloodletting, which was used for almost any diagnosis. Doctors were convinced that along with bad and excess blood, the disease itself left the body. This procedure was performed in spring and autumn, even on healthy people, simply for prevention. Patients already weakened by infection or fever were deliberately deprived of their last reserves of strength. Veins were cut open with a dirty lancet, and blood was collected in the special measuring bowls. Leeches were another incredibly popular tool for cleansing the blood and the entire body of impurities. They were placed on the body by the dozens in the sincere belief that they sucked out toxins and restored internal harmony. These creatures were specially bred or caught in ponds, and it was a whole industry. Catching and selling medical leeches was a very profitable business that fed entire families of catchers. After the procedure, the leeches were often destroyed, as it was believed that they had absorbed the patient's illness. The most disgusting ingredients imaginable were used as medicines: urine, fresh manure, crushed dried insects, and even animal body parts were used. It was believed that the more disgusting and horrible the medicine tasted and smelled, the stronger its effect on the disease. People believed that the evil spirit of the disease would not tolerate such a disgusting neighborhood and would leave the body. The patient had to swallow these horrible mixtures, hoping for a miracle cure. Surgery was the dirty work of butchers and barbers, not learned doctors in clean robes. Educated doctors only gave advice and observed, refusing to touch blood and wounds. Amputations were performed very quickly, as anesthesia simply did not exist. The surgeon worked with a saw and knife at lightning speed while assistants held the screaming patient. The main task was to cut off the rotting piece of flesh before the patient died of pain shock. Open wounds after surgery were often treated with boiling oil or cauterized with a hot iron for disinfection. This did kill the infection, but it caused excruciating pain, often causing people to lose consciousness. Such treatment left terrible scars that never healed completely. The concept of clean, sterile bandages came into medicine much later. In those days, wounds were bandaged with old rags or cloth torn from worn-out linen. Diagnosis of diseases was often based solely on the appearance, color, smell, and even taste of the patient's urine. The doctor would examine the liquid in a special glass vessel for a long time, drawing profound conclusions. Based on the presence of sediment or cloudiness, he determined the condition of the patient's internal organs. This was the main and often the only analytical tool of medieval medicine. Rich people even sent servants with a vessel to the doctor so that he could make a diagnosis in absentia. Childbirth was a deadly, dangerous event for both the mother and the newborn baby. Midwives who delivered babies used dirty hands and unsterile instruments. This often led to childbed fever, sepsis, from which women burned up in a matter of days. Men were usually not allowed to participate in this process, as it was considered a purely female affair. Surviving childbirth and not being left crippled was the first and foremost victory of humans in the struggle for existence. The church insisted that any illness was a just punishment for sins or a test of faith. Therefore, sincere prayer, fasting, and repentance were considered the best medicine rather than medicine. Pilgrimages to holy relics and springs often replaced visits to expensive doctors. Faith in divine miracles was much stronger than faith in medicine, which in those days more often crippled than healed. People sought salvation at the altar when earthly means proved powerless. During terrible plague epidemics, doctors wore famous masks with long beaks filled with aromatic herbs. They believed that the disease was transmitted through bad odors and that herbs should filter the air. These figures in black cloaks looked like harbingers of death rather than saviors, terrifying the townspeople. They carried long canes so they could examine the sick without touching them with their hands. Medicine at that time was a desperate attempt to find a way in the darkness of ignorance and fear. Despite the appalling unsanitary conditions and lack of basic amenities, people in the Middle Ages lived full lives. They fell in love, raised children, built magnificent cathedrals, and created beautiful works of art. The human body demonstrated an incredible ability to adapt and survive in a hostile environment. The immune systems of those who managed to survive early childhood were literally ironclad. They had been hardened by constant attacks from bacteria, viruses, and parasites from the first days of life. Natural selection in those centuries was a cruel and uncompromising filter for each new generation. Weak and sickly children died very early, often before reaching the age of 5. Only those who possessed enormous reserves of strength and innate health survived. High infant mortality was a tragic norm that parents had to accept. Families had 10 children so that at least 3 or 4 would live to adulthood. People knew nothing about the existence of germs, but through experience they developed many useful rules. These traditions helped to minimize risks and prolong life, even if their meaning was not understood. They intuitively used salt, acrid smoke, and vinegar as powerful preservatives and disinfectants. Food was smoked and salted not only for taste, but also to kill rot. Traditions and rituals often concealed a rational grain of survival, proven over centuries. The lack of physical comfort and warmth was compensated for by closer social ties and community. People stayed together in large families to keep warm during the long winter nights. They united to protect themselves from enemies and help each other in times of trouble or hunger. Loneliness in those days was much more frightening than any dirt, cold, or disease. Expulsion from the community was equivalent to a death sentence, as it was impossible to survive alone. The perception of smells and dirt was completely different from that of us, modern, pampered people. What now seems to us to be an unbearable stench was simply the backdrop of everyday life for them. There is a concept of olfactory fatigue, when the nose ceases to notice a constant smell. People are capable of getting used to absolutely anything if it becomes the norm for everyone around them. The smell of an unwashed body was the smell of humanity, and people were not ashamed of it. The history of sanitation is a story of very slow, painful progress and gradual awareness of invisible threats. Every improvement, even the smallest, has been paid for with millions of human lives. From the appearance of the first bar of soap to the construction of urban sewage systems, centuries of trial and error passed. Today we stand on the shoulders of those who survived in this dirty but incredibly vibrant world. Our ancestors were true fighters who passed on the baton of life to us. The Middle Ages were not an era of filth out of conviction or laziness. It was an era of extremely limited opportunities. People did everything they could with the meager knowledge and resources available to them. Obtaining clean water required enormous physical effort, and heating it was an expensive luxury. They tried to be beautiful, neat, and clean to the extent of their understanding of these words. In paintings, we see elegant clothes and elaborate hairstyles, which speaks to a desire for beauty. Their incredible resilience and zest for life deserve our deep respect, not contemptuous condemnation. They managed to preserve and develop civilization despite the plague, endless hunger, and complete unsanitary conditions. They passed on knowledge, wrote books, and discovered new lands in conditions that would have killed us in a week. We are the direct descendants of these incredibly resilient and strong-spirited people. The blood of victors who have gone through centuries of trials flows in each of us. Looking back from our comfortable world, we begin to understand what a long way humanity has come. The fight for hygiene was perhaps the most important battle in our history. Simple things like a hot shower in the morning and soft toilet paper are actually great achievements of civilization. Do you appreciate these comforts a little more now? We have immersed ourselves in a world where smell was a navigator and a clean shirt was a sign of wealth. Life in the Middle Ages was a harsh ordeal, where every day was a small victory over dirt and disease. It was an era without glamour, smelling of smoke, sweat, and life itself in its unattractive form. Now, when you turn on the hot water tap, remember what a luxury it was just a few centuries ago. History is not only about kings and battles, but also about how people learned to take care of their bodies and homes. Which fact about medieval hygiene struck you the most? A shared sponge in the toilet or washing with urine? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new journeys into the past.